Chapter 1, The Obsidian Cage. The flaw wasn't a gaping hole, it was the size of a finger width, but to King Theron, it might as well have been a breach in his own heart. He stared down at the scroll on the black obsidian table, the meticulous sketch detailing a microscopic crack in the south-facing gallery window. "A cracked pane of glass, Your Majesty," General Magnus reported, his voice smooth, too smooth. It was replaced within the hour. Nothing gained, nothing lost. Theron didn't look up, because looking at Magnus meant seeing the ambition behind the general's stiff collar. Truth be told, the only thing Theron ever saw in a nobleman's eyes was the reflection of his crown, and they all wanted to snatch it. "The pane of glass is not the wound, General," Theron said, his tone low and chilling, the words slow and deliberate like ice forming on water. "The lapse that allowed the glass to crack in the first place, that is the wound. It suggests a weakness in the external warding pattern. A distraction." After that, Theron pushed the scroll away. The obsidian private quarters felt like a silent, opulent vault around him. It was a beautiful place, sure, but it felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum built just to hold him. He lived in this isolation because he believed it was the only way to stay alive. "They are all actors," the thought was a constant, bitter mantra in his mind. "Magnus calculates whether he will gain more by feigning loyalty or by selling my head for gold." More importantly, Theron knew his internal flaw drove his rule. He genuinely believed that love and loyalty are transactional, based only on power and title. Every smile, every bow, every oath felt like a cost he had to pay to keep the throne warm. The isolation was necessary, it kept him from the fatal weakness of trust. "The matter is resolved, Your Majesty. Your cousin, Prince Cassian, has sent assurances of his deepest grief regarding the recent threats." Magnus' voice lingered on grief, a subtle dig, maybe. "Assurances," Theron scoffed. "Dismissed, General." As the silence stretched, Theron walked to the soundproof window, looking out over the millions of lights in the city. He saw his capital not as a field of citizens but as a swarm of potential threats. He felt the cold, hard weight of the crown he never took off. Who in that city, really, knew the man who wore it? Did they know he sometimes couldn't breathe under the pressure? Did anyone even care? They mourned the king, he told himself. The man is invisible. Soon after, the door closed, leaving the heavy silence ringing in his ears. Theron turned to the inner chamber, seeking the only soul permitted to break this painful quiet. Chapter 2, The Unspoken Bomb. The air in the inner dressing room was warmer, smelling faintly of clean linen and the deep, rich scent of sandalwood, a fragrance Elian had chosen long ago because Theron hated flowery perfumes. Elian stood perfectly still by the dressing stand. He was the only person Theron allowed this close. He was an Omega, beautiful, yes, but more importantly, he was silent. Truth be told, Elian had taken a self-imposed vow years ago, never speaking unless explicitly ordered, making him the only man in the court who didn't try to manipulate the king with words. "Elian," Theron murmured, the name a soft friction in the quiet. It was an order and an acknowledgement all at once. Elian moved, his dark hair falling forward as he began the nightly ritual, removing the heavy day silks, the ceremonial armor, the stiff mantle. What followed was a dance of routine and profound, unspoken intimacy. In that moment, Theron let his shoulders slump just a fraction. He felt the extreme fatigue that no alpha strength could ward off. Elian, preparing the soft night tunic, noticed it. He always noticed. As Elian helped pull the tunic over Theron's broad shoulders, his hand, slender and unexpectedly warm, settled on the tight muscle near Theron's neck. It wasn't a massage, it was a simple, sustaining weight, a pause of acknowledgement. After that, the tension in Theron's muscle actually loosened, a physical surrender the king hadn't realized he was capable of. Why? The thought slammed into Theron's mind. Why offer comfort when you gain nothing? Theron started, his voice thick. Her voice trembled as she tried to voice the question he never dared to ask. Why do you care? Instead, Elian smoothly withdrew his hand, his eyes remaining downcast, though Theron swore he saw a faint shadow of worry in their depths. He moved to the king's private desk to arrange tomorrow's accessories, his silence unbroken. Elian's presence was like rain after a fever, cool, necessary, and completely inexplicable. More importantly, this ritual was the one thing that challenged Theron's core belief. Elian saw the exhausted man beneath the crown because his duty was focused on the private body, not the public title. The summer roses, Theron said, just to hear his own voice sound strong again. Have them removed from the antechamber. They're too sweet. Elian nodded once, his movement subtle. Theron knew, deep down, that the request was unnecessary. Elian had already had the roses replaced with simple greenery hours ago. Deep down, she knew the truth. He was using the command to assert the distance Elian's simple kindness had closed. Just like that, everything changed, even though nothing had been said. Theron had to prove the touch was meaningless. Chapter 3, The Serpent's Whisper. The cold hand of betrayal reached out right through the morning sunlight. The ritual was the same, a royal taster, a tired-looking beta, sipped the ceremonial morning wine. Moments later, the taster choked, his face turning a sickly blue-gray before he collapsed, hitting the floor with a sickening thud. The wine cup rolled, staining the pristine marble. Theron stood rigid, every muscle locked. This wasn't a quick, clumsy attempt. The poison was complex, slow, meant to look like a sudden illness or accident. It was calculated. It was powerful. What followed was immediate chaos. Theron barked orders, his voice cutting through the rising hysteria of the servants. His master of spies, a man named Valen, rushed in, face pale. Your Majesty, it was traced back to a wine cask delivered yesterday, endorsed by the estate of Baron Vetus. Baron Vetus. A known puppet of Prince Cassian. Cassian, Theron hissed, the name a sharp, dangerous sound. His thoughts spun like furious knives. My own blood. They don't want the throne, they want my complete, violent erasure. Not only that, but Theron felt the fury mix with a desperate, chilling clarity. Cassian knew his weaknesses, his habits. This was the final push. Because of that, his paranoia skyrockets into icy certainty. The Omega, Elian. Is he safe? Theron asked suddenly, the question surprising even himself. He realized, with stunning clarity, that in the moment of existential threat, the only person he instinctively thought to protect was the one who never asked him for anything. Valen frowned. The bath attendant? Yes, sire. He was nowhere near the kitchens. He is below the notice of such threats, thankfully. Below the notice. That's why he was safe. Maybe it was fate, but Theron saw the opportunity. If everyone was trying to kill the king, he needed to find out who would mourn the man. He had to know if Elian's simple compassion was real. What's worse, Theron knew if he stayed, the next attempt would succeed. His goal changed from survival to the desperate validation of his soul. Valen, Theron commanded, his voice now dangerously low and resolved. I have a task. A secret, dangerous task. You will be instrumental. As the truth unraveled, the certainty that his brother sought his death, Theron stared at the empty space where the taster lay. He needed a test. A cruel, definitive test. Chapter 4, The Poisoned Sleep. Fear was a cold, thick liquid. It was a sensation King Theron hadn't felt in years, not even when the dagger came, because he was ready for the dagger. He was not ready for the sensation of suffocating paralysis. It will feel like death, sire, Valen, the master of spies, had warned. Valen's voice was the last thing Theron remembered clearly. Now, there was only a low, frantic ringing in his ears. He lay on the cold marble floor of the obsidian private quarters, every muscle locked solid by the powerful sedative. He was completely conscious, yet completely unable to twitch a finger or move a lash. In that moment, Theron realized the immense risk. If Valen betrayed him, or if Cashin found him before the guards could stage the discovery, he was simply a paralyzed man waiting for the kill. Before he could move, he heard the first guard shout. Then came the sound of running feet, heavy boots sliding on the polished floor. What followed was the theatrical wail of the court servants, a chorus of false grief that was like acid to Theron's soul. See? He thought, his internal monologue a desperate defense mechanism. See how quickly they cry for the convenience of the new regime. But then, a sharp, clear sound cut through the noise, Elian's gasp. It wasn't the practiced wail of the others. It was a single, raw, choked sound of pure shock. Her breath caught, and the sound was so profound, so utterly unmasked, that Theron felt a strange twist in his paralyzed chest. It was the only genuine note in the entire terrible symphony. Soon after, he was lifted. The hands were rough, unskilled, handling him like an object, a sack of meat. He was carried out on a stretcher, and as the sky darkened outside the window, he looked up. He saw the horrified faces of the junior servants passing over him. He didn't see Elian again, but the memory of that single, terrible gasp, that one moment of true emotion, already started to chip away at the fortress of his cynicism. That's why this was the inciting incident. Theron, the mighty king, had become a mute, helpless witness. He had transitioned from ruler to observer, initiating the conflict because he now depended entirely on others, a terrifying position for a man who trusted no one. Meanwhile, his body, swapped for a condemned man, was taken away. Theron's new life, the life of a phantom, was beginning. Chapter 5, The Beggar's Cloak. Days later, Theron was recovering in a damp, rented room in the city's underbelly. He was no longer the king, he was just a rough, hooded commoner. His clothes smelled of sour ale and unwashed wool, a physical insult that was somehow more punishing than any plot. After that, he walked the city. His goal was simple, to gather intelligence and confirm his brother's duplicity. He stood near the palace walls, shrouded in a dark, cheap cloak, watching the dignitaries stream in. Prince Cashin stood at the main gate, accepting condolences. Cashin's face was a masterwork of sorrow, his voice cracked perfectly as he spoke of the tragic loss of my elder brother, the great King Theron. Still, Theron watched, cold satisfaction growing. Hypocrite, he mentally sneered. Your grief is a velvet glove on a mailed fist. But then, a heavy Alpha guard, a man Theron recognized from the 2nd Regiment, shoved him roughly aside. Out of the way, beggar. The king's brother is mourning. The unexpected physical violence, the sheer, casual contempt, jolted Theron. He stumbled, catching himself before he fell. The guard hadn't paused, hadn't cared. Because of that, Theron realized the crushing weight of his former title. Without it, he was nothing. He was dirt. Did you see the arrogance of that prince? A thin woman nearby whispered to her companion. He's raising the market tax already. The dead king was strict, but he was fair. Not only that, but Theron began to hear the chatter of the common folk. They didn't mourn him, the man, but they feared Cashin's rule. His absence was already becoming a political disaster. The space between them burned, the huge, frightening gap between the king he was and the man he was now forced to be. Deep down, she knew the truth. The commoners didn't hate him, they were simply invisible to him, just as he was now invisible to them. This world, where people were worried about bread and taxes, was terrifyingly real, unlike the sterile perfection of the obsidian quarters. Next, he had to go to the funeral procession. He needed to see the final act, the confirmation of his cynicism, to justify his return. Chapter 6, The Procession of Falsehoods. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of incense and the humid autumn weather. Theron stood with the masses, crammed shoulder to shoulder near the gates of the royal crypt. The crowd was a pulsing, silent organism, ready to witness history. As the wind shifted, the royal carriage appeared, carrying the false coffin, draped in the royal banner. Theron, his heart beating a fast, tense rhythm, strained to see. With every step he took toward the pyre, his certainty strengthened. They are waiting for their reward. They are waiting for Cashin's coins. The long, drawn-out drumbeat was a hammer striking against Theron's ribs. He was ready for the final, empty speeches. This moment was the climax of Act 2, the point where his self-imposed test would finally prove his theory, that the world was cold, and that he was right to be alone. But then, the Grand Counselor gave his address, flowery and overdone. Cashin, weeping eloquently, stepped forward next, praising Theron's wisdom. Before he could speak another false word, a figure detached itself from the rank of the king's personal attendants. It was Elian. He was dressed in the simple white of service, small and quiet next to the immense, looming presence of the pyre. He broke his vow of silence. Elian's voice was a whisper, yet it was so heartbreakingly clear that the entire crowd seemed to hold its breath. He always hated the scent of the summer rose perfume, preferring only the rain. In the span of a breath, Theron's whole world shattered. The words were plain. They weren't about war, or law, or power. They spoke only of the man Elian had dressed every day. The king was forgotten, the lonely man was mourned. With a single glance, Theron knew. It was real. The raw, agonizing truth hit him. He had been loved, truly seen, and he had cruelly risked that life just to prove a point. Just like that, everything changed. Climax/turning point, Prince Cashin's voice, harsh and enraged, ripped through the silence. Seize that insolent Omega. Silence him. As if pulled by a string, Theron reacted. Not as the cunning strategist, but as the protector. He had to save the one person whose pure heart had just saved his soul. Next, he would shed the beggar's cloak and become the hunter. The path of paranoia was over, the path of redemption and love had begun. Chapter 7, The Voice of Rain. Prince Cashin's command, seize that insolent Omega. Silence him, was a brutal, physical shock. It ripped Theron from the paralysis of his revelation and launched him into immediate, desperate action. As if pulled by a string, Theron ducked, shoving aside a tall merchant, his training kicking in on pure instinct. The emotional core of the king, Theron, was collapsing, the fierce conviction that he was unloved. His heart skipped a beat later, replaced by a searing, protective panic because the only thing of value he had found in his cold world was now directly threatened. Without thinking, Theron abandoned the dense crowd, sprinting toward the rear wall of the royal crypt. Meanwhile, the loud, chaotic energy of the nobles shifted from mourning to aggressive compliance. They wanted to punish the Omega who dared to speak the truth. Theron found a narrow, shadowed service entrance used by groundskeepers. He plunged into the darkness, the rich smell of damp earth and moss replacing the harsh incense of the funeral. What followed was a frantic, blind race through corridors only he, as king, and perhaps a handful of long-serving attendants, would know. Find him. Save him, Theron's thoughts were short, sharp commands. Despite that he wore the clumsy rags of a beggar, his movements were precise, recalling every hidden panel and disused service staircase. He heard the muffled sounds of shouting ahead. Cashin's men had Elian. The tension broke when Theron reached the main corridor connecting the crypt's service entrance to the palace dungeon. Two hulking royal guards were dragging Elian, his face pale, his wrists bound crudely with rope. Elian wasn't struggling, he looked like a beautiful, broken doll. Deep down, she knew the truth. Theron had risked Elian's life with his selfish test. Now, he would risk his own life to save him. The shattering revelation of Elian's loyalty was now the fuel for his new goal: protect this Omega at all costs. Next, Theron had to create a distraction, fast. Chapter 8, The Hunter and the Prey. The passageway was narrow, made for servants carrying heavy supplies, not for high-speed evasion. Theron saw the opportunity. Before she could move, Theron snatched a heavy, iron-handled bucket filled with slop, the grim refuse from the crypt's kitchen, from a niche. He didn't use finesse, he used raw, primal alpha strength honed by years of training. He swung the bucket like a wrecking ball. Just like that, everything changed. The bucket hit the first guard with a wet, heavy clang. The guard screamed, slipping violently on the greasy contents. The second guard, momentarily distracted, lost his grip on Elian. Move. Now. Theron hissed, his voice rough and low, disguised by the noise. He didn't look at Elian, he couldn't afford to be recognized yet. Elian's core strength, unwavering empathy, manifested here. Instead of running immediately, Elian paused, his eyes wide and uncertain, but recognizing the intent behind the chaos. The guard Theron had hit roared and charged, a blur of polished steel and fury. Theron met him. With his scent in the air, the guard, an alpha, instinctively faltered, sensing the raw, contained power beneath the beggar's rags. Theron used the slight pause. Her body moved on instinct, catching the guard's arm, twisting it sharply. The guard collapsed, winded. As the silence roared in the immediate aftermath, Theron pointed sharply to a rarely used, unmarked wooden door at the end of the passage. Go. Run to the lower city docks. Now. Elian didn't ask questions. He gave Theron one deep, searching look, a look that held confusion, gratitude, and a shadow of recognition, and then ran. The tension broke, and Theron felt a profound relief. He had used his core strength, strategic mind, in the most primitive way possible, relying on confusion and brute force, proving his new commitment was physical, not just emotional. Even so, the other guard was stirring. Theron knew he couldn't outrun a full sweep of the palace. He needed a permanent solution and an ally who could find Elian. Chapter 9, The First Sacrifice. Theron knew exactly where to find the lowest-ranking staff, the kitchen boy, JL, an overworked beta known for his quiet efficiency and desperate need for coin. Theron found JL in the smoky lower kitchens, scrubbing pots. JL. Listen carefully, Theron commanded, his voice tight and authoritative despite his rags. JL, startled, froze. A growl rose in her throat as she stared at the strange, commanding commoner. Who are you? Theron slammed a single gold sovereign, more money than JL saw in a year, onto the countertop. I am the protector. And you will help me save someone who is now hunted by Cashin. Theron knew he had to be brutally honest because his life, and now Elian's, depended on it. He revealed the necessary truth, the man you saw being dragged away, the pale attendant, Elian? He must reach a safe house. You will guide him. If you are caught, you die. If you succeed, you have a lifetime of security. The moment their eyes locked, Theron saw the paralyzing fear in the young beta, but also a flicker of desperate hope and perhaps, a genuine loyalty to the kind Omega attendant. The docks, the old fisherman's warehouse? JL whispered, clearly frightened but already calculating. Yes. But not the warehouse itself. The abandoned clock tower nearby. No one goes there, Theron confirmed. Go now. Use the hidden tunnel under the outer pantry. Tell no one. JL snatched the coin, his hand trembling. As the air thickened with the smell of grease and fear, Theron watched the boy dart out, knowing he had just condemned a loyal, innocent person to the ultimate risk. This was his first significant test. He was forced to rely on the loyalty of commoners, the people he had never truly seen. That night, Theron stood alone in the shadowy alley behind the kitchen walls. He was penniless, stripped of his title, and depending on a fearful kitchen boy to save the only person who had ever truly seen his heart. His life's path had completely changed. The crown was indeed worthless next to Elian's survival. Next, he would have to learn how to survive, not as a king, but as a shadow. Chapter 10, The Price of Disguise. The cold, wet stone of the alley was Theron's new reality. After that, he moved with the shadows, the commoner's rags clinging to his skin like a shroud of failure. His first objective was basic: find money. He risked a dangerous maneuver, infiltrating a safe deposit vault he had established years ago, a cache of gold and contingency funds only the king could access. He felt it, clear as day, the immense, suffocating pressure of his new vulnerability. As the truth unraveled, Theron found the inner vault empty. Cleaned out. Because of that, he realized Cassian hadn't just seized the throne, he had meticulously locked down every resource, anticipating that the deposed king, or his loyalists, might surface. Not only that, but the empty vault was a sign. Cassian was smarter, more ruthless, than Theron had originally judged. Penniless. Powerless. The words echoed in his mind, sharp and humiliating. He was forced to steal a loaf of stale bread from a market stall just to survive. What followed was a profound shift in his perspective. He saw the genuine, biting hunger in the eyes of the city's poor. He heard their low, constant murmuring. "Did you hear?" a merchant grumbled, counting thin copper coins. "Prince Cassian has tripled the levy on grain imports. Says it funds the Royal Mourning Guard. Mourning, another scoffed. He's funding his own coronation. King Theron was hard, but we never went hungry like this." More importantly, Theron realized his pursuit of Elian was no longer just about love, it was about the kingdom itself. Cassian's incompetence and cruelty were a tangible threat to millions. His personal desperation merged with his royal duty. Instead of despairing over the lost gold, Theron focused on the public resentment. He was forced to fully inhabit the pauper's world, realizing his old power meant nothing here. The tension broke when he saw a lone, official courier riding fast toward the city center. Couriers carried documents, and documents held truth. Next, he would have to become a thief of information. Chapter 11, Midpoint Shift, The Crumbling Rain. The courier was young and fast, but Theron was faster. Without warning, he ambushed the man in a deserted side street, using his superior strength to subdue him silently. He quickly rifled through the messenger's satchel. The dispatch, sealed with the crest of a powerful border baron, was alarming. It wasn't addressed to Cassian, but to Cassian's most incompetent general. The document detailed troop shortages, supply mismanagement, and the baron's thinly veiled threat of secession if order was not restored. "The defenses are crumbling," Theron whispered, reading the panicked scrawl. His emotional state shifted instantly to clarity and heightened resolve. This was the midpoint shift. Theron's purpose expanded. He wasn't just saving Elian, he was saving the kingdom from the disaster Cassian was creating. The stakes were now higher, more personal, and undeniably rooted in duty. Because of that, Theron found his old self again, the strategist, the king, but refined by the lessons of the streets. "The kingdom needs me," he thought, "but I need Elian to secure it." With every heartbeat, Theron knew he couldn't wait any longer. He had to warn Elian that the danger was mounting and that the hidden sanctuary might not be safe from Cassian's growing desperation. As if summoned, a wave of pure urgency washed over him. He folded the dispatch, hiding it in his rags. The risks of visiting the safe house were immense, but the risk of losing Elian was infinite. Despite that, he knew he couldn't reveal his identity yet. Not until the time was right. Next, he began the nerve-wracking journey toward the abandoned clock tower, guided only by hope and the scent of damp earth Elian carried. Chapter 12, A Shared Whisper. The abandoned clock tower was dark, smelling of dust and dried wood. Theron slipped inside, his body tense, ready for a fight. As the air thickened, he saw JL, the loyal kitchen boy, sitting watch, and Elian huddled by a single, weak fire. Elian looked exhausted, but alive. His name hung in the air, though Theron didn't speak it. "I am the royal protector," Theron announced, his voice deep and rough, altered slightly to hide its regal timbre. He kept his hood low, allowing only the faintest shadow of his face to show. Elian rose slowly, his unwavering empathy allowing him to look past the rags to the intent. The moment their eyes locked, Elian did not see the beggar, he saw the man whose scent he knew, the gait he recognized, the sheer, protective alpha power. He was exhausted, but he was processing. "They're searching for you," Theron warned, moving closer, lowering his voice. Cashin's men raided the first safe house. The court is dangerous. You must stay hidden. JL will guide you to the next location. Elian looked up at him, his mouth opening as if to ask 100 questions, but he honored his silent vow. Instead, he reached out a single, hesitant hand and gently adjusted the frayed cloth near Theron's shoulder. It was a gesture of quiet, mutual care, the same unspoken balm from the obsidian private quarters. Which meant that Elian knew. Or at least suspected. The unspoken emotional bond deepened, solidified not by a crown, but by shared trauma and secret knowledge. Theron was the only person Elian had confided in by speaking at the funeral, and Elian was the only person Theron was deceiving out of love. Truth be told, the deception felt like a betrayal now, but Theron knew revealing the king was alive would immediately make Elian Cashin's prime target. Stay safe, Theron murmured, forcing himself to retreat. He allowed himself one final, lingering look at the Omega's pale, beautiful face, knowing that this secret connection was the new source of his power, and his greatest weakness. Next, Theron would have to find the resources to fight a king, a task far more complex than saving a single life. Chapter 13, The First Recruitment. Theron knew a throne wasn't taken with stale bread and rags. He needed steel, money, and loyalty forged by respect, not fear. After that, he used the evidence of Cashin's troop mismanagement, taken from the courier's dispatch, to find the one man Cashin had unjustly sidelined, General Valerius. Valerius was drinking in a tavern far outside the city walls, his face etched with resentment. Theron approached him, still wearing the cloak of a commoner, but his bearing was undeniably royal. General Valerius, Theron said, his voice dropping low, demanding attention despite the noise of the tavern. The kingdom is bleeding, and you sit here drinking. Valerius sneered, recognizing the accent of a wealthy alpha, but dismissing the clothes. Mind your business, beggar. The king is dead, and the prince rewards those who kneel fastest. The king is dead, Theron agreed, sitting down. But the prince is a fool who is starving his soldiers and risking a border war. Read this. Theron slid the stolen dispatch across the table. The moment their eyes locked, Valerius saw not a beggar, but a man who held power and dangerous truth. He snatched the document. As he read, his face drained of color. This is treasonous, Valerius whispered, sweat beading on his brow. Only the king would know this detail. I am the king, Theron stated simply, his voice a low rumble, stripped of any ornamentation. But I have no armies, no gold, and no proof beyond my word. You risk execution by talking to me. In that moment, Theron was forced to rely on trust, the one currency he had always discarded. He had to use charisma and earned respect, the complete opposite of his old tyrannical method. Despite that, Valerius stood slowly, his old military instincts overriding his fear of Cashin. He looked at Theron, the man in rags who commanded obedience, and then he slowly, heavily, bowed. His bones remembered him, the authority of his sovereign. My allegiance is to the true crown, even if it hides in the shadows, Valerius declared. Major commitment, Theron had his first soldier. The counter-coup was officially launched. Next, he needed confirmation that Elian was safe, because the danger was closing in fast. Chapter 14, The Shadow Watcher. Theron and Valerius began their clandestine planning, but Theron's focus was fractured. He needed to know Elian was secure. Valerius secured a position for Theron, a hidden perch overlooking the palace route, disguised as a stone mason. Meanwhile, Cashin, sensing the unrest, had relocated Elian from the clock tower to a new, heavily guarded location, trying to draw out any remaining loyalists. As the wind shifted, Theron watched a closed royal carriage, the kind used for high-value prisoners or essential personnel, move swiftly through the upper district. His instincts surged. He knew Elian was inside. But then, the carriage hit a small pothole. The door shuddered open a fraction. In the span of a breath, Theron saw a pale, slender hand flash out, dropping something small onto the dirt road. The door immediately slammed shut. A signal. Without thinking, Theron risked everything, scrambling down from his high perch, moving quickly through the busy street before the item could be crushed. He reached it, a small, intricately embroidered piece of fabric. It was from the inner lining of Theron's own favorite traveling tunic, a piece Elian would have handled daily. Her body moved on instinct, catching the small prize. The emotional arc escalates. This wasn't just evidence of Elian's safety, it was confirmation that Elian suspected the king was alive and was actively trying to communicate. Because of that, Elian's personal danger had skyrocketed. Cassion's aggression was now directly threatening Theron's heart. Instead of finding comfort, Theron found urgency. Elian was smart, and his investigation was putting him in grave danger. With his scent in the air, Theron swore he could smell the faint anxiety on the scrap of cloth. Next, Theron needed the ultimate symbol of authority to move faster than Cassion's paranoia. Chapter 15, The Royal Seal Gambit. The Royal Seal, the heavy, silver disc used to stamp final, binding decrees, was kept in a multi-layered, highly secured archive beneath the old library. Only the king knew the full sequence of levers and hidden locks needed to retrieve it. That night, Theron, accompanied by Valerius, slipped into the labyrinthine palace underbelly. The air thickened with the smell of old parchment and cold stone. "Your Majesty, if anyone sees us, they will assume we are tomb robbers," Valerius whispered, his hand resting nervously on his sword hilt. "We are, in a way," Theron replied, his voice calm, but his emotional state at peak tension. "We are robbing the tomb Cassion created for me." The final lock was a mechanism Theron's grandfather had installed, a complex series of pressure plates hidden in the floor tiles. Theron walked the path by memory, his footsteps soft and precise, remembering the exact cadence and weight distribution needed. He felt it, clear as day, the familiar, heavy responsibility of his life. As the mark tingled, Theron pressed the final plate. The stone ceiling ground open, revealing the heavy silver disc, the royal seal, resting on a velvet cushion. No turning back. By obtaining the seal, Theron officially moved from fugitive to contender. This wasn't just a political tool, it was the physical manifestation of his commitment. Which meant that the confrontation with Cassion was inevitable and deadly. Theron grabbed the seal, its cold weight grounding him. As if the world narrowed to just him, the seal, and Elian's memory, he knew he was ready. Next, he would face the darkness that had consumed his reign. Chapter 16, The Trap Springs. The rendezvous point was an old, abandoned armory outside the city walls. Theron and General Valerius had planned to meet with a trusted armaments dealer here, securing the first cache of essential weapons. After that, they would have the means to start a proper uprising. "I don't like the silence, Your Majesty," Valerius muttered, his hand gripping his sword. As the air thickened, a sense of cold dread settled over Theron. Without warning, the doors of the armory burst open. Not with the weapon dealer, but with the chilling sight of Cassion's royal guard, fully armored and silent. It was an ambush. "Checkmate, brother," a voice drawled from the shadows. Prince Cassion stepped forward, his face alight with smug, predatory satisfaction. "Did you truly think you were the only one who learned the old routes?" The tension broke with a crash as Valerius roared, drawing his sword and charging the guards. Theron, already realizing the devastating failure, lunged forward to join the fight, but Valerius intercepted him. "Go. Your Majesty, you must not be taken." Valerius bellowed, blocking a guard's vicious strike with his own body. The climax of the scene was a moment of shocking, personal sacrifice. Valerius, Theron's first ally, fell beneath the sheer weight of numbers. In the quiet that followed the terrible clang of steel, Theron felt a profound failure. Major setback, he had lost his vital military ally and a key resource. He had failed the one man who had shown him loyalty without fear, all because Cassion was a smarter opponent than he gave him credit for. Because of that, Theron was forced to make a cruel choice. He couldn't save Valerius without being captured. He turned and ran, the sound of the general's muffled cry echoing in his ears. Her chest ached with guilt. Next, the failure would become personal, threatening the only light left in his life. Chapter 17, The Messenger's Doom. Theron returned to the slums, desperate to warn Elian before Cashin leveraged the captured general. He felt it, clear as day, a searing premonition of disaster. He didn't make it to Elian's new safe house. He saw the commotion from 2 streets away, royal guards, torches flaring, and the rough, familiar sound of fear. He found JL, the loyal kitchen boy, crumpled in a dark alley, barely conscious and bleeding from a head wound. JL. Theron knelt, ignoring the danger. Where is Elian? JL whimpered, his eyes wide with paralyzing terror. They took him. They found the location. They tortured, the laundry Omega, sire. He broke. Lowest point approaching, Theron's failure was complete. The chain of loyalty, the very thing he had tested and finally started to believe in, had broken. Elian was captured directly because of the connection to Theron. Without warning, a guard shouted in the distance. Theron quickly hid JL and risked moving closer to the commotion. He saw the devastating scene. Elian was being dragged roughly into a closed, high-security wagon. Elian's movements were weak, he had clearly been beaten. Then, a searing image ignited an uncontrollable fury. Theron watched one of Cashin's men strike Elian with the blunt end of his staff, a cruel, unnecessary blow that made Elian cry out. Her world tilted. Mine. The word was a silent, primal scream in Theron's mind. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, his internal rage was so violent it almost forced the beggar's rags off his body. He was utterly helpless. The king, standing 20 paces away, could not reach his Omega. Next, Theron would have to face the consequences of his actions in the darkness. Chapter 18, Dark Night of the Soul. Theron hid in the ruins of the first safe house, the abandoned clock tower. The small fire pit was cold, the only scent was the faint lingering smell of dust and the rain Elian loved. He was bleeding from a shallow cut sustained during his escape, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional laceration. He ripped off the heavy, humiliating rags. He stood there, alone, bruised, his powerful alpha body shaking with despair. I caused this, the realization was a crushing weight. I wanted to test the world, and my test destroyed the only good thing in it. In the stillness that followed, Theron realized his internal flaw had resurfaced in the worst possible way. He had acted selfishly, not as a king protecting his people, but as a wounded man seeking validation. He caused Elian's suffering by attempting the self-serving, cruel test. With every heartbeat, he rejected the flaw definitively. My life is not about survival, it is about redemption. I must save Elian, even if it costs me my life. He found a small piece of the rose-scented fabric Elian had dropped, the same fabric Theron hated, which Elian had carried. It was a perfect, heartbreaking metaphor. He no longer cared about the crown, he cared only for the heart of the Omega who saw him. The bond pulsed, a sharp, painful promise. As the echo faded of Cashin's cruelty, Theron found renewed resolve. He was stripped bare, humiliated, and utterly alone, but his purpose was pure. He was no longer Theron, the paranoid king, but Theron, the desperate protector. Next, he would commit to the final, reckless plan to save Elian and reclaim his destiny. Chapter 19, The King Rises. Theron's despair was cold, sharp steel, not paralyzing grief. He had one last ally, one last card, Valen, his master of spies. Valen had orchestrated the fake death and had gone into hiding, unaware Theron was truly alive. After that, Theron moved through the dead of night, using the last of his stolen coppers to purchase materials for a coded message, a rare, invisible ink used only by the highest levels of the palace intelligence network. Without thinking, Theron wrote the message, revealing his identity and the devastating news: Cashin holds Elian. Valerius is taken. I need the blueprint of the obsidian quarters now. It was a massive leap of faith, completely contradictory to his old nature. In that moment, Theron felt profound vulnerability. He was betting everything on the loyalty of a single man whom he had mostly treated as a tool. Because of that, the risk was immense. If Valen failed, Theron had no one left. As the bond pulsed with the memory of Elian's sacrifice, Theron handed the message to a nervous, loyal street urchin he had paid handsomely. He waited, hidden in a dusty attic, for 3 agonizing hours. But then, a return message arrived, coded in simple poetry: "The watchman stands guard. The map is drawn. The turning point was secured." Valen was loyal. Theron's reliance on genuine loyalty had paid off, providing the crucial intelligence network needed for the counter-coup. With every heartbeat, Theron prepared to shed the commoner's rags. Valen's message also contained a small package, a highly distilled solution that masked scent and a key that accessed Theron's private armory hidden deep beneath the old barracks. Next, he would use Elian's memory to reclaim his throne. Chapter 20, The Blueprint and the Promise. Valen, through a newly secured communication line, quickly relayed the intelligence Theron needed. The air thickened with the intensity of their strategic planning. "Cashin has reinforced the main entrances to the Obsidian quarters," Valen's frantic voice whispered through the voice tube. "He's placed his most loyal thugs inside. It's a fortress, sire. It has weaknesses only one man would know," Theron countered, his voice now regaining its commanding timbre. He felt it, clear as day, the path to victory. Elian. Instead of relying on brute force, Theron channeled his strategic mind, using his emotional purpose as a weapon. He began mapping out the infiltration based entirely on Elian's past daily routine. The ventilation shafts in the dressing room, Elian cleaned them every month. "They open near the roof," Theron explained, tracing the line on Valen's hurried sketch. "The linen chute in the private bath, it bypasses the entire antechamber guard post." Not only that, but Theron knew the secret sequence of levers controlling the light and scent in the quarters, details Elian had handled daily. As if the world narrowed, Theron realized Elian's service was the ultimate blueprint. The plot leverages the unspoken connection as a weapon. Theron's love and observation of Elian had given him the keys to the kingdom. Even so, Theron felt a profound obligation. "If we succeed, Valen, Elian will be my consort, my hand of the heart. A position of power, not servitude. My word." As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Theron secured his armor, the weight of the steel feeling heavy, but newly justified. He wasn't fighting for power, he was fighting for the justice Elian deserved. Next, he would step back into the shadows of the palace walls. Chapter 21, Infiltration. The final plan was reckless, relying on speed and the element of total surprise. Theron, accompanied by Valen and a small group of 3 fiercely loyal, low-ranking spies, gathered in the subterranean maintenance tunnels beneath the barracks. The tension broke when Theron put on his armor. He looked, finally, like the king again. With his scent in the air, the small group moved like ghosts, using the hidden service passages Theron had learned through his childhood explorations and Elian's care. They had to sneak past Cashin's heavily armed perimeter guards, a task that required impossible silence. They used the linen chute, a narrow, foul-smelling vertical tunnel, to ascend directly into the private quarters. The space between them burned with urgency and focused resolve. As the sky darkened outside the window of the private bath, Theron emerged, pulling his followers up behind him. He was back in his gilded cage, but this time, he was the hunter. His heart skipped as he moved toward the throne room. The sound of Cashin's voice booming from the throne room echoed in the passage, loud and arrogant, addressing his council. "He's there. And Elian is likely nearby." Theron clutched the heavy royal seal in his non-sword hand, the weight a physical burden of immense power and risk. Next, the final curtain would rise, and the king would return. Chapter 22, The Climax, The King Returns. The guards posted outside the throne room were Cashin's most brutal mercenaries, not men loyal to the crown. Without thinking, Theron signaled Valen. The skirmish was short, sharp, and silent, quickly neutralizing the perimeter threat. As the silence roared, Theron flung the heavy oak doors open with a crash that echoed through the vast hall. Prince Cashin was seated on the throne, presiding over a council of terrified nobles. Elian was visible nearby, held roughly by 2 large guards near the dais, his face pale and bruised, a hostage. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with sheer, focused power. The king is not dead. The hall erupted in chaos. Cashin stood, his face contorted in disbelief, then rage. You. How? I live, Theron announced, marching forward, his armor gleaming in the light, the sight of his true king's face shattering the usurper's authority. He was furious. And I have brought my proof of sovereignty. Theron slammed the royal seal onto the stone floor. The heavy silver disc rang out, a declaration of divine right that terrified the assembled nobles. The king is an impostor. Cashin shrieked, rallying his thugs. Seize him. He murdered his double and plots treason. Treason is already seated. Theron roared back, pointing at Cashin. I escaped your poison, brother. I watched you betray this kingdom, starving its people and risking war. He then pointed to a specific, minor noble, Lord Vetus. Did you not supply the toxin to the morning wine? Because of that undeniable accusation, coupled with the sight of the true seal, the loyal nobles, who were only waiting for a leader, rushed to Theron's side. The tide had turned. The final confrontation was swift and brutal. Cashin, in desperation, lunged at Theron. Theron deflected the weak attack, his movements efficient and devastating. His instincts surged, and he struck Cashin down, securing the kingdom in a flash of steel and righteous fury. But then, Theron rushed past the defeated Cashin. He didn't look at the crown, he ran directly to Elian. Next, the man would speak to his Omega before the king addressed his court. Chapter 23, The Public Truth. Theron reached Elian, who was trembling but conscious, his eyes wide, fixed on Theron's face, no longer hidden by rags or shadowed by the throne's mantle. The guards holding Elian had fled. Elian, Theron murmured, his voice cracking with exhaustion and profound relief. He gently touched the bruise on Elian's cheek, his alpha hand infinitely tender. Without another word, Theron performed the unthinkable. He knelt. He knelt before the injured Omega, before the astonished court, before the defeated Cashin, who was being dragged away. You were right, Theron said, his voice loud enough for the entire council to hear. I ruled by fear. I tested this court, searching for loyalty, and I found nothing but ambition. As her wolf stirred, Elian watched Theron, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears, finally understanding the depth of the king's desperate test. Elian, Theron continued, his voice ringing with earnest confession, you are the only soul who saw the man beneath the mantle. You mourned the rain, not the roses. He looked at the court, rejecting his cynical past. I was alive. I faked my death to prove my deep-seated belief that loyalty was transactional. This man, Theron gestured to Elian, proved me wrong. He spoke the truth, and he was beaten for it. He is the most loyal heart in this kingdom. Internal conflict resolved, Theron publicly rejected his internal flaw and embraced earned loyalty. Elian's silent nod of forgiveness, a tiny, precious movement of his head, was the only answer Theron needed, sealing their emotional arc. Next, Theron would begin the long, slow work of rebuilding the kingdom with that loyalty at its center. Chapter 24 Resolution. Weeks later, the air in the palace felt lighter, cleaner. Cashin was exiled. Valerius was recovering, hailed as a hero. Theron, seated on the throne, wore simpler robes now. He felt the weight of the crown, but it was replaced by the lighter, more meaningful burden of responsibility. He signed the document that changed the face of the kingdom, the Decree of the Heart. It proclaimed the end of caste-based servitude and established a new, meritocratic system. As the mark tingled, Elian stood beside him, no longer an attendant, but dressed in the official silks of his new position. Hand of the Heart, Theron said, his voice filled with pride, formally addressing Elian's new title as chief advisor and consort. Do you approve? It is just, Elian replied, his voice soft, but no longer silent. He had found his voice and his place. With a single glance, Theron knew their transformation was complete. He was a king whose reign was based on empathy and vulnerability, a profound shift from his paranoid past. The king rises, not just to the throne, but to his true potential. Theron reached out and covered Elian's hand as they both signed the parchment, their hands brushing. The moment their eyes locked, it was no longer duty, but a shared, unbreakable love. Next, they would find peace in the quiet moments they both desperately needed. Cloud with Rain epilogue scene, the scent of change. The private quarters were completely different now. All the obsidian furniture was gone, replaced by light wood and comfortable textures. A faint, earthy scent of herbs and rain filled the air. It was night. It was raining gently outside. Theron stood by the open window, listening to the rain fall. He was not looking for cracks in the glass or assassins in the shadows. He was simply listening to the water. Elian came to him, dressed in a simple tunic, his steps silent and familiar. "You are quiet," Elian whispered, leaning his head against Theron's shoulder. It was a gesture of ownership, of peace. "I am," Theron murmured, wrapping his arms around Elian, savoring the solid, real presence. "I used to hate the rain when I was younger. It reminded me of cold, trapped loneliness." When her name left his lips, Theron held him closer. Now, Theron looked out at the drops hitting the pane. "It smells like safety. Like truth." As the bond pulsed with mutual affection, Elian looked up, his eyes meeting Theron's. "The shadows are gone, Theron." "No," Theron corrected gently, pulling him closer. "They are still there. But the true light found me when I was at my most alone, and you brought the rain into my desert." And just like that, everything changed. They were no longer king and attendant, or alpha and omega. They were two people who had survived a lifetime of betrayal to find a love forged in fire and truth. The story ended not with a political victory, but with the quiet, profound peace of two hearts finally healed. The end.